our city's problem and not our nation's problems. No, thank you. That's the Fianna Fáil of today. That's the Fianna Fáil of that this country has always known. And we don't think it's acceptable that this motion should stand before this House today, or rather should pass before this House today. When we look at the Fianna Fáil of today, we look at a party that desires static and a lack of change. We look at the fact that historically they've always isolated us. Now, in my second point, that does go as far as to say that in the relation of the political structures. But as far as the fact that their moral courage is at stake, no thank you. They wanted a parochial nation. They wanted a small-minded group of people. The fact that Fianna Fáil only get out of power when their failure reaches such a critical mass that we're willing to elect the other guys, and we're not championing them either, the other guys for 4 years, and then to put the Fianna Fáil back into power for 20 years, is a huge failing of our political system, and not an argument for how stupid you and I are to vote one way or another, as the proposition seem to think we're telling you. When we look at the fact that Fianna Fáil are indifferent, as far as their policies are concerned, to every major issue you can identify as a political one, until it suits them to tell you how to think, or rather, in the feedback loop, you tell them how you think and they respond. No, thank you. When we look at the North, when we look at economics, when we look at anything you can think of, this is a party that wants to know what you think, and then on the basis of what will get them most votes, what will secure power further for them, will enact that policy. No, thank you. In the instance of this party, we not only look at their lack of moral courage in terms of their capacity to enact real policies, but we look at the fact that their leadership and the systematic and endemic corruption is something of an expectation among the party faithful. In this instance, we get the answer of tribunals, which I'm sure is the point of information from the second speaker there. In that instance, I say that that's a Fianna Fáil solution to a Fianna Fáil problem. That's a consequenceless talking shop where you span it out and no one has to deal with the consequences of their actions for a very long time. And I'll take now...
Corruption in the most left-wing and right-wings of governments. It's
that's
just
fine,
an
that's fine,
endemic
that's fine,
human flaw.
Why? Yeah. In this instance, we look at the fact that we continue to allow a party that apparently deserves congratulations for their actions to elect and enact, continue to propose corrupt individuals through their party structures, and to have that as an acceptable situation. We look to Haughey, we look to Bertie, we look to their councillors in planning issues, we look to the more controversial issues in that instance. When we look at their claim that economic prosperity comes from Fianna Fáil, rather than from the yellow and blue of Europe, or from our independent Supreme Court, which is what has an impact on our human rights law, rather than the rather conservative and backward law of Fianna Fáil, we look at the fact that in the 1970s, they doubled national debt, and then doubled it again that same decade. These are not progressive people, nor ones wishing to follow a liberal policy. No, thank you. In the instance of, even for instance, the diaspora, that was either a well-known secret, yet an open one, that was not dealt with, or, at its worst, was a shame and something that people were called traitors for. So we don't think this is a party that ever really thought anything of anyone that wasn't, apparently, in inverted commas, according to the proposition, Irish. No, thank you. When we look at democracy, which apparently is something that Fianna Fáil stands for, that's either, according to the prop, a removal of choice in the drive to the centre, or, on the other hand, it's just a word they use repeatedly in their speeches. We don't think it's a fair assessment of the Irish political system. When we look at that in comparison to other systems in parties, yes, there are differences between the parties in those countries, but they're broad. They represent many things. The Democratic and Republican parties of the United States represent huge and diverse people from the cities to the flyover states in the centre. That's what it is, in the same way that New Labour represents a very different thing to Old Labour, in the same way that David Cameron's Conservative Party is a different one to Margaret Thatcher's. Parties within this context have broad reaches of support. Now, as far as Fianna Fáil is concerned, they cover everyone all the time anyway. So obviously that's a great thing. Well, no, it's not. It's never a good thing when you don't have a choice to begin with. When democracy isn't something that exists, no thank you, in your country, but rather it's something that you are forced to accept. When we look at parochial Ireland, we look at the fact that It's the small ideological parties that get squeezed out by association with Fianna Fáil. In the instance of the PDs, it was crushed. In the instance of the Greens, they're going to be crushed. No offense to any Greens. As far as that's concerned, we look at the fact that there is no capacity for these small bodies with clear goals and clear policies to survive with the amorphous blob of Fianna Fáil crushing them and crowding them out. It inevitably leads to unviable and invalid political parties much smaller with real identities. Even in that context, we look at the fact that there's a double disassociation from power that Fianna Fáil has engineered. Firstly, your public representatives have no power within the Dáil because the cabinet is where the power exists. There is no public acceptable dissent within the Fianna Fáil party that we can identify on a regular basis, unlike in other political systems. At the same time, because politics is so local, ladies and gentlemen, you are focused on thinking about the small and the contemporary, the here and the now, outside your front step. And in that instance, that damages us more than anything else. And that also can be tied to Fianna Fáil and their involvement in the political system we have today. Ladies and gentlemen, Fianna Fáil and its ilk are owed nothing by us, not least our gratitude. On that basis, we beg to oppose. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Conor. And now the final speaker in proposition, Janine Ryan.
Lord Trimble, honourable adjudicators, ladies and gentlemen, I am not going to stand up here and tell you that for the past 84 years, Fianna Fáil have been perfect. In fact, I would willingly have been the first person to stand up and tell you that they made some mistakes. However, as the draw has made me put me in this position, I'm now going to be the 11th. But what I can tell you is that from the day that they agreed to take the oath and enter the Dáil, that they have fought for the Irish people. They have fought to do what they have believed was in our best interests. We do not owe them gratitude necessarily because of the mistakes they made or the good things that they have done, but specifically because that they have always fought to do what they thought was right for us, to do what they thought would make us happy and make us a better country. And for that, we owe them a huge amount of gratitude. They have spent 80 years helping us. And would we go back and do the same things again? Maybe, maybe not. But they didn't have a crystal ball, and they didn't know the results. And the fact that we can stand here now and suggest that maybe we wouldn't have done those things is only because the country has progressed so much that we are now able to see that. We think it's very easy to stand here and criticise. It's not so easy to make the tough calls when you need to. And for that, we owe them. We want to talk about two things this evening. We want to talk about the Ireland that we have become, and I'm sorry if that's not good enough for the opposition. And I don't know if there was a better Ireland out there. I'm sorry that I don't have that answer. But what we do know is that it is something we can be proud of. We also want to talk about why their pragmatic policies were actually a good thing, and why parochial politics at a time when the country was new and finding its feet was exactly what we needed. I'm sorry that the opposition don't think we have a national identity. I'm sorry they would prefer to have their potholes filled by the British. However, I am proud to stand here and say that I am Irish. I am proud to stand here and say that we do have a national identity. The issue is that an Ireland without Fianna Fáil and without what they did is unimaginable and unknowable. We do not know what would have happened. We do not know if it would have been better. Perhaps it would. But what we do know is what happened. We do know that we are the only country who gained independence at that time that haven't suffered major civil unrest since. We do know that we have a constitution that we can be proud of, that we may have amended on some occasions when the will of the people sought to update it, but that has still survived the test of time since 1937. We think that that is fundamentally important. We think it is important that we do have an identity that we can be proud of. We think that it's important that Fianna Fáil sought to give us that identity. We think the fact that they fought so hard to get us independence, and at that time, because at that time when Cumann na Gael weren't willing to stand and be counted, that we think it's very important that how we developed as a country happened then, that allowed us to be neutral in the Second World War, that allowed us to stand on our own 2 feet, and that a country where that hadn't happened would be entirely different from the one that we have now. We owe them immense amounts of gratitude for that. We owe them for standing up and doing the right thing. We know that the Civil War dead were still dead. We're sure that they did too. But they had a call to make, whereby they could stand on principle or they could act in the public good. That wasn't an easy personal decision for them to make. They fought in the Civil War too, but they realized that if they wanted to achieve anything for Irish citizens, that the time had come where they had to stand up and be counted. And if that meant walking into the Dáil and taking the oath, then that was what they had to do, because they couldn't achieve good any other way. We say that that is commendable. That was an incredibly tough decision to make, and it is one that we have paid for since in all the best possible ways. It is what has allowed Ireland to grow into the country it has become. I'm sorry if the opposition aren't proud of that. We on the proposition very much so are. We no thank you. We think that parochial politics was exactly what was needed. It's easy to say now, when the country has found its feet and does stand among the greats in the world, that we wouldn't have done that. But at a time when there was civil unrest, when people were still bitter about the Civil War, and when the country easily could have fallen apart, as so many do in that period after gaining independence, that what they did was they went out and they reached out to each individual citizen. We were told that it was a bad thing that they sought to talk to people and find out what the people wanted. I'm sorry I was unaware that the job of a government is to make all of their citizens as unhappy as is possible and to do exactly what is against the will of the people. It's not a bad thing, and I'll take you in a second, sir. It's not a bad thing that they sought to make people happy. We've already told you that they were willing to make the tough calls when that was necessary. They were willing to make budget cuts when that was necessary. But they were also willing to accept what was the will of the people and act in their best interests. Go ahead, Ian.
Can you explain to me what tough calls were made by Fianna Fáil when they refused to invest in education, infrastructure or economic liberalisation for the decades of the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, the 70s, the 80s and indeed the noughties? What difficult decisions did they make and what was actual pandering?
People pander to their citizens when they think that that is what will best achieve civil rest and give people what they want. They have made decisions right down the line. They made a difficult decision to go into the Dáil in the first place. They made the decisions that had to be made. That does not necessarily mean that we progressed as well economically as other countries did, for a variety of reasons, including whether or not that was possible to our particularly small state. But what they did do is do what they felt was in the best interests of the country. It took an awful lot of courage to stand up there and abandon your principles to walk in and act in the public good. So I won't accept the opposition telling us that Fianna Fáil lack courage or lack an ability to stand on what they believe is correct. We don't think that populism and pragmatism were bad things. We think that they were exactly what was needed so that the people could have a government that they could elect and that they could depend on. We think that that showed that they were listening to the people, that they were giving the people what they wanted. That was exactly what people needed to hear at the time. It was exactly what people needed in order to believe that the government was someone that they could have faith in, that the government was acting how they wanted them to. We don't think that that's a particularly bad thing. We think that the corruption obviously was always going to occur, that when you have a party in power for the best part of 80 years, that it will attract some people who are doing it for the wrong reasons. But we think that overall, they acted in our best interests in as much of the time as is possible. Were the results for that always perfect? No, of course they weren't. I challenge you to find any political system where the results have been perfect. But what they were something that we can be proud of. They were something that we can look back on and say that they acted for us, that they did what we needed them to do. And for that, we always will owe them that debt of gratitude. Thank you.
Thank you, Janine. And now the final speaker in opposition, Niall Sherry.
Lord Trimble, adjudicators, ladies and gentlemen. I spent a good chunk of this week carefully crafting an opening joke based around Willie O'Dee's political tenacity. And let me just say that it is bloody typical of a Fianna Fáil politician to finally do the right thing at the absolute worst possible time. And the fact that it would have been so easy for me to make that joke says a lot, though. It is appalling that it took such extreme pressure to make a minister for defense resign after he lied about a political opponent and then lied in court about lying about the political opponent and then said that it was the Gardaí's fault for giving him false information. Like, it was the triple Lutz of undermining state institutions, and yet he survived a motion of no confidence and was only taken down because of Twitter and one disaffected senator. Like, it was farcical, in the same way that a minister for finance with no bank account is farcical, in the same way that a Taoiseach telling you to tighten your belt while he owns a private island and a fleet of racehorses is farcical, and yet that's what we've come to expect from Irish politics. I shouldn't be able to derive humour from saying things that Fianna Fáil have done in a vaguely outraged, sarcastic voice, and yet here we are. We were told by Owen that corruption doesn't matter because we reflected through tribunals. We say, first of all, that self-reflection is hard when your memory is quite so patchy, but also that tribunals are a poor substitute for people who commit crimes going to jail for committing those crimes. We don't think that tribunals are anywhere near enough, no. So why is it so important to have a politics that isn't a national punchline? Because people need to be able to trust and respect their politicians. When they don't, people disengage from the political process. When they don't, we no longer properly debate policies that affect the nation as a whole. Look at NAMA at the moment. No one is arguing the benefits and, opposite benefits, bad things to do with NAMA. People are saying, where is the catch? How are Fianna Fáil benefiting their latest favourite interest group this time? And that means that we don't have actual national politics or national political debate. Not only have Fianna Fáil failed us as a country, not only have they failed to make us into a country we can be proud of, they've put us in a position where we can't actually change that because people are so disillusioned by the politics of this land. So why might they deserve gratitude? We were told in that last speech by Janine that by removing arms and actually entering the parliament and respecting the democratic mandate of the people, that is sufficient for them to warrant, or for us to need to give them a debt of gratitude. We think that's the basic requirement of any democratic party ever, to put away your arms, stop fighting your civil wars, and actually listen to the people who are voting for you. No. And we think that basing their entire case around a counterfactual that we wouldn't have gotten independence if it weren't for Fianna Fáil is just mental. We've been told that Fianna Fáil deserve gratitude because they keep getting elected. Aside from that being a little bit circular, that we should thank them for giving us the opportunity to elect them quite so many times, we think that the reason why they keep getting elected isn't that people love them so much, it's the pandering that Neil and Shane defended in First Prop. And I'll take you on this, Neil, if you want to tell me why pandering is so great.
Yeah, it's so great because it gives Fianna Fáil as a conduit to democracy, transposing what the people of Ireland want onto the national stage.
Okay. 3 things in response to that. First of all, we think it's a little bit dishonest to represent yourself as the conduit of the people when your leader owns a private island. I realise that me and Niamh have harped on that quite a bit, but it's just insane. And not having been alive at that time, I can't quite understand it. Secondly, we think that when you act just as a conduit for the short-term goals of people, you end up with short-term, short-sighted national policies. Was it good for Ireland for Fianna Fáil to abolish domestic rates in the 70s for the sake of winning an election? No, probably not. But it made people happy at the time, so we should thank them for that. We disagree. And finally, we think that local politics often crowds out national politics. As Niamh said, one hip replacement does not a functioning HSE make. It discourages actual national change for the better, because when you have your hip replacement, you don't care if anyone else gets it. You don't have to look to national institutions. You don't have to look to see whether the country is functioning, because you know that your local TD will always look after you personally. They've turned Ireland into a place where people don't have to worry about their neighbours. They've destroyed the national community. No thank you. And what has been the result of this? We say that the utter unwillingness of Fianna Fáil to make hard decisions has caused huge problems for this country. We think that it has placed the burden on others to make the hard decisions for them. Sean talked a lot about the social change that Ireland has seen. The social change that Ireland has seen in the past number of decades came about not because of daring political leadership, but because of men and women, individuals who were willing to put themselves out there, men and women like David Norris and Mary McGee, and a series of letters, a girl of 14 who we will only ever know as X, who were willing to throw themselves on the mercy of the courts to get the social advancement that Fianna Fáil weren't willing to bring about because it would have alienated people, because it would have made them unpopular, because looking after the interests of 14-year-old rape victims doesn't play particularly well in many parts of Ireland. We say I should really stop saying we say. Ladies and gentlemen, like when a ferry to England is your answer to a tough